Welcome to our second session of Creative Industries. Today's topic is the art economy in a time of corona, a little bit punny. For those who don't know me, I'm the new director of Umbrella Studio Contemporary Art. I have a background in curatorship and arts management, working predominantly with regional and remote art communities in Australia and abroad. Now, the creative industry sessions are focused on arts development, artist toolkit expansion, and critical art world discussions. And we invite audiences to have input in the themes, topics, and guests in the series. The program is supported by the Regional Arts Development Fund. We're very grateful to them for their support. Can I get the next slide, Alan? So Umbrella acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians, the people of the lands and seas where we are all connecting from. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and future. So today's agenda, we're going to have an introduction from me. We are then going to hear from our guest panellists. So we've got Alison McDonald, Ryan Tucker, Alex Wagner and Wendy Brooks today. And that will be followed by a Q&A session. So a bit of housekeeping. For the Q&A section, you can type your questions in the Q&A box just down the bottom there, or it might be up the top on your screen. Just introduce yourself, where you're connecting in from, and we'll moderate those at the end of the session. So, how do we value the arts economy? The Department of Communications and the Arts, or which is no longer actually, we are now falling under the Department for Infrastructure and Roads, but they value the creative and cultural activity in Australia at more than 111 billion, and it employs close to 600,000 people. The coronavirus is probably having a startling impact on that this year. It's really affected the everyday lives, the livelihoods of Australian artists, art workers and arts organisations. Galleries have been closed, public gatherings have been restricted, arts workers and arts organisations are facing unexpected income losses. We're yet to see the full impact of it all. So I've asked today's guests to discuss the Australian arts economy, what it looks like from their vantage point right now. Where does Queensland fit in that? What are the challenges? What are the strategies? And how do we adapt and how can we help recovery? So I wanted to start at the coalface, well, with an independent artist from North Queensland, Alison McDonald. So we're really pleased to have her here.
Okay.
Hi, Alison. She creates artworks that explore and inspire social change. Her work has been shown nationally and internationally, and her recent solo exhibition, Wanton, Wild and Unimagined, toured to 13 galleries around Australia. So I'll just welcome her and thank you.
Thanks for having me, Kate. I appreciate it. Would you like to go on from here or do you want me to start?
Yeah, I'll invite you to speak a little bit about your experience, what's been happening for you, what you see as the strategies for independent artists.
How have I been impacted? I've lost 2 casual jobs and I've lost probably 4 gigs, a couple of them interstate. Unfortunately, there was no contract signed, so I couldn't claim them through the Australia Council. At the same time as coronavirus sort of happened, my husband was diagnosed with a nasty cancer So we sort of had to deal with all that and how you see doctors or don't see doctors, and people telling us what we should do and shouldn't do, and go to Brisbane and do that. So that was pretty hard. But I guess some of the good part was I could actually get into my studio and clean it up because I'd been in there for so long, actually, except for working. So it was really nice to do that. And I have been going so flat out for so long that I really wanted to just press the pause button, but you can't afford to in the arts. You've just got to take up every opportunity. So in a way, coronavirus has pressed that pause button for me, and it also means that I'm home here with my husband to go through his treatment, which is really, really important. When I guess coronavirus hit, I was overwhelmed with all this cancelled, that cancelled, and all the other things cancelled, just like everyone else. And I had to just shut off because I just didn't want to hear it anymore. Fortunately, and everything was digital. You just heard from everyone, emails and stuff like that. One day I sent an email to Daniel about something minor, and I said, "How's Kate going?" Because I was thinking about her in a new city and quite lonely. And the next day I got a phone call from Kate, and that voice from the distance made a lot of difference, Kate. And I think communication is a big deal at the moment. The other thing that's happened is since galleries have started to get their act together and make offers, those offers I have been applying for this, that and everything else since I've lost everything. And amongst that, I have been applying for job seeker, job keeper. Oh my God, job keeper. I'm a sole trader, so I went through that process. It's bigger than any application I've ever done. It was very arduous. 4 long phone calls to the ATO for about an hour and a half each time. But to my amazement, Sunday night, I found out I got it. So there is good things that happen. I can't believe it. So that's me, really.
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, it's been a sort of rough time, and we understand that it's you know, outside of our professional lives, we've got our personal lives which are being impacted, and it's all different for everyone. So yeah, I wish you sort of well with what your husband's going through. And it's really nice to hear from an artist and what they're experiencing. And it's great news that you were able to get the job keeper. It sounds like it's an epic journey to do it, and I hope that it will be made easier by the federal government soon.
I'm happy to answer any questions people have, either, by the way.
Oh, that's great. I'm sure people want to know how you did it. So now I want to invite Brian Tucker to talk to us. So Brian Tucker is a board member of Umbrella Studio Contemporary Arts, and he's also our treasurer. He's got 36 years experience as an accountant and auditor working in the arts. You might like to listen to a radio interview he did back in February. It's about his experience working with First Nations art centres. It's really, really fascinating. So I'll hand over to Brian now.
Thank you, Kate, and welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. I guess the comment that I made when we were about a month into this coronavirus, and at that stage I was on my way back from a holiday in the United Kingdom, and one of the comments that I made was that I suspected that the damage to the economy is actually going to be far greater than the damage to people's lives and people's health. We've had episodes of viruses previously, None of them turned out to be as bad as they were predicted to be. And in fact, I suspect that this one is turning out to be not as bad as it's been predicted to be as well. But we're in a similar situation to the global financial crisis back in 2008, when we were all fed a constant diet of bad news and increasingly bad news. And I think people became so terrified at all of that they stopped investing at that stage. They stopped thinking about the future because they believed there was no future. And I think in some respects, this virus has done exactly the same thing. People have become terrified now of people just don't want to go back to work because they're afraid that they're going to catch the virus, they're going to die of the virus, when in actual fact the deaths worldwide from this virus are less than the number of deaths from normal flu that happen every year anyway. The effect on the arts has been almost from day one dramatic and dreadful. My son, who looks after the tax side of the business, has told me of just constant phone calls from bands, from artists, from venues, from festivals, just deploring the fact that they've basically had to shut down business. We've had bands and musicians with gigs cancelled. We've had artists, visual artists with exhibitions cancelled. And it's going to take a long time for us to recover from that. Doing things online is certainly a start, but it's no substitute for the real thing. I think people want to go to a concert, they want to go to an exhibition. Online is just a start, and I think that it's an important start. But what we need to be aware of is that everybody else is now doing exactly the same thing. So everybody else is going online and trying to attract audiences that way. The other side to this particular problem, of course, is that with so many people now out of work, with so many businesses having shut their doors, the government's revenue from income tax in the foreseeable future is going to be drastically reduced, and that's going to result in less money available from the government for support for example, in our case, the arts. And I think that we're facing a long time where we're going to be in the wilderness, and I think we're going to have to be extremely resilient. But I do fear that the arts are going to come out of this probably much worse than many other sectors of the economy. I don't like being pessimistic, and I desperately hope that I'm proved wrong. But that's my view of the situation as I see it at the moment.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah.
Don't thank me for that.
Well, I guess it's probably a good time to bring Alex Wagner in, who is, I guess, working at a Queensland government level in looking at strategies to support the arts sector. So Alex is an investment manager for Arts Queensland. He's our client manager, and in a previous life, a professional dancer who worked around the world. I'll just hand over to you, Alex. I'm looking forward to hearing about what Arts Queensland have been up to and the strategies that have been put in place and will be put in place. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate, and good to hear Brian's and Alison's view as well, because they're all incredibly important. And I will preface, within this economy, I'm certainly not an accountant or a sort of finance professional, so my perspective purely is working with Arts Queensland and working with our arts sector. Now, if you can see the slide, hopefully up on the screen, that's sort of officially what's been sort of pushed through now. That covers the total Queensland government with over $6 billion worth of support initiatives. in particular, Arts Queensland's done a few initiatives, and they were very, very quick. And I also will sort of really sort of point out that this is such a quickly evolving pandemic that it's also a little bit unknown in some elements. So I know there's a lot of work been going on and a lot of things have been brought together, but it's quite unprecedented in a way. So absolutely agree with Brian in the sense that to top all of this off, there is finite resources. There is absolutely going to be struggles forecasting into the future to look at what is available. However, I'm from the perspective that arts is such a wonderful connector of our community, and to be quite frank as well, artists have been able to struggle along and exist for so many centuries that they're I've got a great hope that they will be resilient and they will be able to bring our not only Queensland society but our Australian society back together. Having said that, absolutely echoing what Brian said, there is so much conversation at the moment with not only large organisations, so your big organisations, say Queensland Theatre, Opera Queensland, Goma, QPAC, right down to the small independents. Every story is absolutely heartbreaking. So it has been quite tough on those levels. But having said that, the government certainly is looking, and I know through Arts Queensland is in contact with the Minister every single day to take all feedback to the Minister, to look at options, to look at plans. What you'll see on that slide, simply probably which is most relevant to the smaller independents or independent artists, simple things like the current contestable programs, streamline them, open criteria, making digital development far easier to apply for, things like that. So they're things straight off the bat that have helped. Feedback that we've got from everyone across the sector is, of course, you'll probably see on one of the slides in front of you, all these issues. I mean, subsidising costs of presentation, supporting local artists to work in local venues that most of them are shut, infrastructure support for digital and outdoor presentation. So again, artists are very resilient and arts companies are very resilient. So they've looked at what current restrictions are, and they've looked at how do we exist and how do we make this work for us. So we're also looking along those same lines. Arts Queensland is currently doing sector consultations, particularly around genres, to get a lot of this feedback coming in. That feedback will be translated into actions. In fact, our DDG in one of the consultations was specifically saying, look, we will take as much feedback as we can and go to government and say, look, our arts sector is struggling and we do want to support it. And again, having said that, there is finite resources. Unfortunately, at this time, health is a priority. So as you can imagine, arts does get pushed a little bit down the list sometimes because of that. And that doesn't stop us from trying that. So we are working very hard to try and push the message through of how the sector is impacted and what needs to happen for the future. Moving forward, things like I've probably got on that slide, the Audience Outlook Monitor, which is across all governments and jurisdictions in Australia, bringing together just to give organisations and artists tools to understand what's happening. For instance, as a dancer, I was a past dancer, and the audience is key. So if you're operating an organisation or you're a solo artist, your audience or your viewers, they're obviously going to be key to what happens in the weeks and months ahead. So things like the Audience Outlook Monitor has enabled sort of a bit of data to capture, to see what the sentiment is, what the feeling is, and again, as in a sort of positive. So when it's possible to return, there is an element of audiences that will have issues and want to see vaccines, of course, delivered. But the great news is really most supporters want to be there to support the arts. but again, as I said, there is a lot of work going on to progress this and support the sector. And as I said, I've got a great belief in the resilience of artists, and no matter sort of what does occur, but also happy to ask or help with any specific questions or look into it. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, it's been interesting looking at the Audience Outlook Monitor results because it does bode well for audiences coming back. That's a positive. We've really appreciated how Arts Queensland has been consulting across the sector, and I joined a consultation session on behalf of Umbrella on Monday, and it was great to be able to feed things back up the line and know that they were being shared directly with the Arts Minister, and that she's been working to advocate at a federal level for the art sector in Queensland. So that's really fantastic. And Alex has invited the audience to share any priorities that they have for support. So if you want to put that in the Q&A section, the little Q&A with the little chat bubbles, that would be great, and we'll talk about that in the Q&A section. Now, our next panellist, Wendy Brooks, just seeing that she's there. Hi.
Hi.
So Wendy is the Managing Director of Wendy Brooks and Partners. Their company provides strategic fundraising services and administrative services to the community sector. Wendy worked with us to build Philanthropic Partners for our major touring exhibition that was launched last year, Legacy Reflections on Mabo. So we've really enjoyed working with her and having her support to build private funding for our projects. So I'm interested to see or to hear from you, Wendy, the mood of the philanthropic sector.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. It was quite fortuitous, actually, that just before I was about to start speaking, the rain stopped, but we've had this incredible torrential downpour that was completely unexpected with a lot of hail. And it just took me back to my last time in Townsville, where I presented to the board on the strategic planning that we did with the board. And the ceiling, it was the first day of the floods, and the ceiling actually fell in of Umbrella Studio just after we had our board meeting. So I don't know what it is about Umbrella, but maybe it's about Umbrella being the protector against the rain, Kate, and you know that you're going to survive all these torrential downpours wherever they occur. I'll just speak briefly about how I see the philanthropic landscape, and then I'd really be happy to take questions. So I won't speak for very long. But I think my entire career has been working in this space of being a broker between great organisations with amazing impact in the community and the philanthropists who want to fund that impact. So I've been in a very privileged position to be able to get to know many of the really serious philanthropists in Australia and get to know what they're interested in supporting and help to broker relationships with the organisations that really deserve their support. And I also deal very closely with the many hundreds of charitable trusts that mostly were established as testamentary trusts, so mostly established as part of a deceased estate, where of course the founder's no longer with us, but trustees are responsible for governing and managing the distribution of the funds. And these charitable trusts are established, mostly established with a fairly large corpus, or a large amount of money initially that grows over time. And they are required at law to distribute 5% of the corpus every year. And they're the only type of trust that is allowed at law to continue in perpetuity, so forever. And there are many thousands in Australia of these charitable trusts, and many of them have a purpose within their deed to support the arts. Not all, but many of them do, and the arts falls under the charitable purpose more broadly anyway. So if charitable trusts are established just for charitable purposes, the arts actually falls under that broader purpose. Now, the challenge is for you as artists that many of the charitable trusts can only make distributions to organisations, not to individuals. So if you were going to access funding through many of the charitable trusts, it would have to be the organisation that you're associated with would have to apply on your behalf for funding. But that's definitely something that we want to see more of. And of course, individuals can give money to whoever they like. They may not get a tax deduction if they're giving to you as an individual, but we don't actually see that as an enormous barrier to donations and gifts from individuals. If they really believe in the person, the work that the person's doing, or the project, the tax deduction is a secondary concern. But the charitable trusts have to give to organisations that have the charitable status and a deductible gift recipient status, mostly DGR1, the technical term. But in my career, which has now spanned nearly 30 years, I've seen an enormous change in the structure of Australian society and a huge shift to being a much more unequal society. So seeing an enormous shift of the wealth into the hands of less and less people, and a much bigger divide between the poorest and the wealthiest in Australia. That's been a progressive trend. It's been a whole lot of factors have come into play with that, and it hasn't even been a one particular side of politics pushing that more than the other, but that's been the drift and the trend. And we're now in the most unequal society in my lifetime that we've ever seen. And I think my comment about COVID-19 and this economic circumstance is that this will result in an even greater divide. So we're going to see an even bigger disparity between the wealthiest and the poorest. There'll be a squeezing of the middle class. Middle class will get less and less. And yet when I'm 60, and when I was born, the middle class was by far the majority. Most people were in that middle section, and there weren't very many incredibly wealthy people in Australia when I was born, but that's not the case anymore. There are a growing number of billionaires, and the concentration of wealth is much more in their hands. So I guess part of my mandate is to make sure that we direct the attention of the people with the money to the really worthy and really worthwhile activities in the community, and make sure that they're aware of this incredible wealth of artistic talent and ability. When BRW did BRW publishes a rich list every year, you're probably aware of it, the top 500 wealthiest people in Australia. It's well worth having a look at. And when they did some research on the 50 wealthiest people in Australia and what they like to support with their philanthropy, sadly, the top 50 wealthiest people are not all philanthropic. They don't all give money to good causes. So the top 50 most generous people out of that 500 rich list is an embarrassingly small proportion, and compares very unfavourably with Europe, UK and America, where we're very poor at the wealthiest people, the people who are reporting incomes of more than $1 million a year. We have a very poor percentage of those people who actually then claim any tax deduction for donations. But of those 50 most generous in Australia, nearly all of them say that one of their top priority areas for funding is the arts. So that's very interesting, isn't it? because I think that, well, my experience certainly is that whilst some of the bigger arts organisations attract, good philanthropic money, I would say most of the arts organisations that we come across and deal with have very little funding from any of the top philanthropists in Australia, or any philanthropists for that matter at all, of whatever level. And yet they list arts as being a high priority in their funding. Just for interest, the other areas that they're mostly interested in are medical research, and that's usually because they know they're going to die and they're going to die of something, so they might as well fund medical research. And the other area of real interest is education, and usually what that means is that they're going to give a fair bit of funding to one of the big bluestone universities, usually University of Melbourne or University of Sydney. So, and they're taking the lion's share of the philanthropic funding in Australia, and very little of that would be directed to the arts. So the message I want to give you is that research is really important, finding who these funders are, where they are, what they're giving to. Doing a bit of research, it's actually quite easy to do this research. You can join our community for a fairly low fee, and you can get a regular update of funders who will fund the arts, and you can be specific about a region, and you can be specific about an art form as well and narrow it down. But it's really worth having a look at who is actually out there funding. There's no register of funders, but our community does compile a very good list, updated list of funding opportunities, and they send those out almost on a weekly basis. And the other way of doing it is to go and have a look at the annual reports of the big organisations, arts organisations that you know are getting philanthropic funding, and they list the philanthropic funders. So have a look at who's funding them, and then do a bit of research online, a bit of good old Google, and have a look and see who those funders are. Often they'll have websites, often they'll proudly talk about what they do support, and find out who the key contact person is that you need to build a relationship with. Because people fundamentally give to people. And if I leave you with one idea, it is that you really do need to make contact and personally get to know the people who are responsible for administering the bigger charitable trusts, or the people who are administering the philanthropy for the bigger philanthropists, and get to know them, and then that will help you to be able to put your case forward for funding. So I think I'll leave it there, Kate.
Thanks, Wendy. Some good tips in there. Relationships, and I think that's, key for everybody right now. Whatever way we can maintain our relationships is really good for personal well-being, but also, professional well-being. So we're coming up to our Q&A session. I want to invite people to submit questions in the Q&A box inside the Zoom session. So if you want to put questions in there, that'd be great, to any of our panelists, or more just general questions that our panelists can answer, and also comments as well. We do have some pre-prepared questions, or questions, sorry, that were submitted prior to the session. Alan, are you able to show oh no, hang on, I can't see it. So a really good question here from Sonia Ward, who's a North Queensland artist. How do you think the current access and focus on free online workshops, viewings of exhibitions, courses, and diverse art experiences will affect perceptions and the value of artistic work in the arts industry? It's an interesting question, and pertinent to what Umbrella's been doing. We've been providing free public programs digitally, and I guess, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because it could create a perception that because it's free, because we're giving it away, perhaps it's not as valuable. But I think what's been important for Umbrella is that we're actually, in all these programs, we're paying artists for their labour, and we're providing it for free because we're aware of the economic climate of our audiences. And as I was just saying before, we want to keep connecting with the community because we feel that's really important, and that is the feedback that we're getting. Like Alison said earlier in the session, it was really nice for her and I to chat on the phone when it all started to get a bit crazy, just connecting with each other. So I think there's value that I think audience are experiencing and appreciating in connecting. Looking to the future, I guess where appropriate, we'll be gradually moving back to a pay model. But Umbrella always offers some free programming. I know, Alison, you had some thoughts about this question too.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks, Sonia, for the question. Umbrella has been providing them free, but not all organisations have been. There's a couple of other Queensland organisations that I've done workshops with, and unfortunately, they're not even dropping their costs at all. And I think it's not a good time to be making money out of artists. The only price drop they've put in is for members. So if Arts Queensland's listening, that would be a nice one to address, because it's although they're free, they're worth value. You know, the other good thing is, really good thing is, for regional artists, is that these organisations can't any longer reach people, and so the digital platform has made it even for everyone. And all of a sudden, these organisations who never used to be able to reach us can. So that's amazing. It's a more even playing field. I don't know if that addresses the question, Sonia.
And I think, the digital will never replace the in-person and the physical experience. But I think to the future, looking to the future, it is useful for sort of augmenting, in addition to the physical, to provide access more broadly. And I hope that what people will be valuing the work that goes into it, even though it's free. You can provide some feedback or a further question if you want, Sonia. Alan, would you mind changing the slide? So this is for anyone on the panel. Governments at all levels, federal, state and local, have pushed the arts sector to pursue more earned revenue through events, and the sector, or the private sector, and the sector was told it would make us more viable. But during disasters like the flooding in Townsville last year and the pandemic this year, it makes us dangerously vulnerable. Wouldn't stable government funding be the thing that ensures the health and longevity of the sector? Would anyone from the panel want to take that one on?
Yeah, I'm happy to have a go at that, Kate.
Thank you.
Look, I think this is absolutely imperative. Stable funding from governments, federal, state, and some local government is absolutely essential. There is absolutely no way that arts organisations can attract private income or earned income, if they're charging fee for service, without a firm and sustainable base. A lot of people say to me, oh, but if you have too much government funding, then the philanthropists won't give. Well, philanthropists don't like to fund a black hole, and they will never fund a deficit. So if you're looking at suddenly losing a whole lot of funding from government, or it's looking shaky, it's the biggest turn-off you could ever have for a private philanthropist, because philanthropists are investors. When they give money, they see it as an investment in something really exciting and good, like they would invest in business if they were angel investors. And their return is community outcome rather than financial return, but they still see it as an investment. And they want to back winners. And you want to present as an arts organisation in a way that shows that you're here for the long term, that you are sustainable, that you've got your act together, that you know how to budget properly, and you're not staring at this terrible black hole. And I think the problem with government not giving multi-year funding and changing the levels of funding and shifting all the time and focusing more of the funding on the really big arts organisations than leaving the others, the smaller ones, to struggle along, always creates a very uneven playing field and makes it very, very hard to convince funders, the private funders, that you're worth backing. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, it is. I think it's so important that you have that stable funding from state and federal and local. And as you were saying, it's like that the small to medium sector, which has really struggled over the last decade in making sure that they've got secure governmental funding with the cuts to OSCO. But it's such a valuable part of the creative industry because it actually supplies the large and the large scale sector organisations. So you're cutting off your nose to spite your face if you don't support at that level. Did anyone else want to address that, or should we go to the next question?
I'll just make one very quick comment, and that is that when I'm asked to write a letter of support, whether it's for a grant application or for any other purpose, I almost invariably end the letter of support with words along the following lines. You have an opportunity to get in on the ground floor with this organisation/artist, and how fantastic would it be in 5 years' time for you to be able to say, I was there at the beginning.
I like that, and I hope it has leveraged some good support over the years. Can I get the next question, Alan? And remember, you can ask questions in the session. So this is for anyone on the panel. How do we help change the value that government places on arts and culture when there are already strong economic arguments that they are overlooking, so that, for instance, the sector isn't relegated to sub-portfolios? Anyone want to tackle that one?
Is this one for Wendy?
I think Wendy was keen on having a go at this. Yeah.
I'm also happy to when Wendy's finished.
Yeah, okay. No, I'm really happy to. I'm finding quite a shift in the way that government perceives and is influenced by philanthropy. And this is a very big change in the last 4 or 5 years, where the really significant philanthropists are actually prepared to have conversations with senior people in government, ministers, ministerial advisors, and others, and push the barrow on behalf of the organisations that they fund. And this has really changed. I mean, you could never get government to pay attention to philanthropists 10 years ago. But I'm seeing philanthropists we deal with actually say, oh, well, why isn't government giving us more money, or why isn't government going to consider funding this? And then actually picking up the phone and getting in to speak to the minister, or getting in to speak to somebody very senior in the bureaucracy. So, Alex, I don't know if that's your experience, but this is what I'm seeing from, I am in Victoria as well, and it is different in different states. But this is at a federal level as well. So I would say if you can get some philanthropists to really become your friend and really support what you're doing and take a really keen interest and build up a strong relationship, they're just as likely to, as Brian said, they're just as likely to write letters of support, pick up the phone, help lobby to make sure that we as a community value the arts in a way that we really should. And I think this is where we've got to actually really swing into action in the arts and get the attention that we deserve, because government at the moment, state and federal, is relegating the arts to the back seat and It was already happening before COVID-19, but my God, it's going to be a terrible period the next 10 years for the arts unless some people with real influence swing into action.
Yep.
Thank you.
Alex, did you want to speak to that question?
Absolutely, thanks, Kate, and absolutely to echo Wendy's comments as well. I think the strongest element really needs to be is the as not only as Queenslanders but as Australian public to advocate for the arts, and 100% that message needs to go all the way through. We're lucky in Queensland to have an arts minister, in my opinion, who really values the arts and loves the arts, and you'll see her at all different events all across Queensland. But having said that too, the government is a large beast, so it has so many different levels, and as I mentioned before, you've got very much competing environments, so the larger elements of government will always dominate unless the public really pushes through and advocates for the arts. And in Arts Queensland, we are constantly pushing messages upwards to connect the larger portion of sort of government to the arts. But I don't believe this is just a Queensland problem. I think it is a national issue. And as sort of Wendy really did indicate through the Australia Council too, they've had their own issues federally. But all I will say is keep on advocating for the arts. Send your messages to sort of the government to be part of contestable funding, really be part of it, and to show that really Queenslanders do value the arts as an important, integral part of what they do. A lot of the time you'll see sports on their headlines, you'll see health on the headlines, education, they're all incredibly important and valuable elements of our society. But I truly believe that arts, again, is the connector that brings all this together. And if that can be advocated all across the Queensland society, I think that places all the arguments in a far stronger position and enables also that conversation to happen at a higher level, i.e. with high net worth individuals, with local governments, with state governments, all connecting. If that conversation's happening, for instance, just as if you think of the David Walsh's down in Tasmania, that conversation, bringing together Dark Mofo, all of those elements, bringing government together. Look how that's been transformational. You've got your Woodfords, of course, that are getting bigger and stronger, but of course, in this current environment, are struggling just as much as a small independent artist. So I'd really reiterate, keep that advocacy going through. Make sure that the Queensland population is really saying, we value the arts and we want the arts to be part of the conversation. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Alex. I think when we start to open up state-to-state borders and looking to next year when international tourism probably won't be happening, it's the cultural tourism that's happening regionally and from state to state that's going to be so vital to not just the creative economy but the larger economy of small businesses, and I think we're so important for the recovery. So I hope, we'll be advocating up the line to that. And I know that was part of a discussion with Arts Queensland that they want to support that. So, yeah. We've got one more pre-submitted question. This one's for Brian Tucker. The Australia Council for the Arts now has a co-funding model where they are asking for donations. This was shocking to me, as they are a peak government body who are now competing for the same funding, the same funds that actual on-the-ground arts organisations are vying for. Doesn't this undermine the Australia Council for the Arts and its role to support artists and organisations?
This statement first appeared, someone posted it to me on Facebook, and I immediately commented in the same sort of words as this questioner has raised, and that was that I thought it was shocking. And right now, I'm just looking at the Australia Council for the Arts website, and the section that actually deals with supporting the arts through the Australia Council. And I would say that they could simply remove all reference to the Australia Council in that paragraph and replace it with Creative Partnerships Australia. That's a fund that's already in existence. It's available for people to support individual artists and get a tax deduction for their money. And I've done that myself. And I know that, that those funds will go directly to that particular artist. When you look at the Australia Council's statement on their website, there is actually nothing to indicate that in fact any of those donated funds will necessarily go to any artist at all. It may simply go towards the Australia Council's operating revenue and to be spent on running the Australia Council. I think it's a travesty of what they're supposed to be about. And I would prefer to see Australians, individuals, as well as philanthropists and others, to contribute directly to deductible gift recipients or to individual artists through Creative Partnerships Australia. I think it's awful, and I agree with what this person is saying.
Can I comment on that, Kate?
Yeah, for sure, Wendy.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Brian. And it harkens back to at the start of my career, years and years ago, when the Australian Business Arts Foundation was established.
Yeah.
And the rationale behind that was, oh, well, we will create a conduit for business and philanthropists to give us money, which we will then distribute to the arts. Well, what happened was it just created yet another sort of an intermediary of government, and the businesses and the private philanthropists didn't give to it in the way that they were expecting, because they're quite happy just to give directly if they give at all. They don't want to go through an intermediary because, you know, inevitably the costs are taken out. You don't know what your money's used for. And why should you go through an intermediary when there are so many well-deserving organisations? So I'm staggered, and I can't see it being successful. And I think it's much more important that artists and arts organisations build relationships with philanthropists and really work hard at attracting funding from the philanthropists that are interested in funding the arts directly. Get those relationships happening and bypass any of this nonsense.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, it's very interesting what's happening with the Australia Council. I don't think we've got any extra questions from today's session, and we are heading up to 1 o'clock, or we're just hitting 1 o'clock. So I guess I wanted to thank all our panellists, Alison, Brian, Wendy and Alex, for being a part of today's session. Really appreciate it. I've got a lot of notes here, things that I will follow up on now from your advice and your the thinking that you've been having. And I'd like to thank our audience who have joined us today. So we'll be announcing the next topic and guest soon. You are welcome to provide some ideas on topics to themes, guests, and send that to office@umbrella.org.au. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
And thanks, audience.